Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's exciting to be here for the 10th reInvent. My name is Rob Zarnecki. I look after product management for Outposts. I've been here with Amazon for a little more than 7 years now. And I'm excited to be here today with Rich Rodolfo, who looks after operations and infrastructure R&D at Philips, to talk a little bit about extending AWS where customers and organizations need it most. Just a brief overview of the agenda today. If you know nothing about what we're doing at the edge, hybrid, or Outposts, you'll learn an awful lot about how we're thinking about it, what we're doing today and in the future. We've also got some exciting momentum to share from this year, some announcements that Adam made earlier today, as well as more to come in 2022. So since we started this cloud journey 15 years ago, customers have been sharing their hybrid use cases. And like with any other workload, their needs have evolved over time. And we've learned more about what these customers need to do and what their end use cases require from compute and storage services, as well as all of the additional services that we build on top of that. Now, running workloads in regions and local zones is often the first thing that came to mind as customers thought about running in the cloud. There are more and more pieces of these workloads when you step back and look more broadly at the architecture that need to remain somewhere that we don't yet have a facility or a presence. And customers, as they adopt the cloud and run more workloads in the cloud, they've come to expect the same benefits that they enjoy in our regions. Things like managed services, familiar APIs, and tooling. And they want to extend that to their hybrid workloads as well. And this can range from so many use cases, things like latency-sensitive workloads, data residency requirements, modernization, disaster recovery without expanding a data center or managing a new one, and others. Now, of course, at AWS, everything we do starts with the customer, and we work backwards from there. And our work in the hybrid space is no different. We've invested in the areas that have been most important to our customers over the years as we've moved along this journey. And we've built things like our consistent container experience, both on AWS infrastructure and off AWS infrastructure. We've invested in storage services that allow customers to move, synchronize, and back up their block and object, as well as file storage and other services. We, of course, extend our networking to the edge and beyond, and our AWS management tools also can work across hybrid deployments. Not to mention our now 4-year plus partnership with VMware as we continue to accelerate cloud adoption for customers that are running vSphere-based workloads and want to enjoy the benefits and scalability that the cloud offers without the need to re-architect their applications. And we're just getting started in the hybrid space. And there's so many workloads that we now can help take on more and more of that undifferentiated heavy lifting and allow the customers to focus on what really differentiates their business against their competitors and serve their end users and customers even better than they have before. And what we've learned over our years in the hybrid space is that we're seeing an evolution where customers have this continuum of applications. And some are easier and some are harder to move. So if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, these are the workloads that are easier to move to the cloud, to the region, to our existing local zones. And these can range from back office applications to SaaS applications that are ultimately might be delivered to a mobile device or something similar. But by contrast, those on the right, these workloads are much harder to migrate. This is where things like ultra-low latency or local data processing for workloads that need to be on the factory floor to automate operations in manufacturing, as an example, or real-time medical imaging, content and media streaming that needs to be close to the end user who is consuming this content. Those are harder to bring to our regions because we can't be in the facility, or maybe we aren't in every metro area where they need to run. And in the middle, you have these workloads that could run in a cloud, in one of our facilities, if we had one. They could be great in a local zone, but maybe we don't have one there today. And this is the type of situation that often comes up with data residency, for example, in financial services, real money gaming, things like that. There are often contractual requirements, as an example, in public sector contracts that require data to be in a specific facility, maybe patrolled by members of a certain organization to make sure that their data is safe, secure, and within their control. And if you think about the cloud continuum and at AWS, where these workloads run, we can start with the regions. And of course, any workload that we can serve in the region, we'd prefer to serve in the region because the customers get all the benefits of scale and flexibility, and they have our full set of services and infrastructure that we manage. But then as you move into the middle tier, this is where things like Outposts and local zones and wavelength zones, which are built on top of Outpost hardware, but managed by AWS, allow us to bring AWS services closer to where customers need them and to offer flexibility so that we can meet their specific requirements, whether it has to be on the factory floor, in the medical facility, or just in the local metro area, or within, say, a 10 millisecond hop to their base of users or their branch office or home office. And then you have those workloads at the far edge, remote location, where there may not be consistent network connectivity. There is no on-premise availability. This isn't a data center. This isn't a conditioned facility in some cases. This could be a cruise ship, a submarine, an oil rig, or the like. And that's where services like our AWS IoT Greengrass, FreeRTOS, and the Snow family can really get out there and help customers extend AWS services to these rugged, disconnected environments. Now, when we think about our services and the customer's use cases, it's our goal to provide support for customers and services that help them run their applications wherever they need to run it. And to offer them, when we can, as an example with Outposts, the same infrastructure that we use in our regions, the same operational consistency, the same APIs and services, the same tools, and more importantly, the same pace of innovation that they see in our region. As we build services and deploy them in the region, where we can, we deploy that benefit, whether it's a security patch, an operational improvement, or a new feature, to the Outposts, just the same pace that we do in our region. So customers do get to bring the full benefit of the cloud with Outposts wherever they deploy their infrastructure. So we've talked a little bit about Outposts. It's hard to talk hybrid without talking Outposts. What is Outposts? Outposts allow customers to develop their applications however they need to using AWS services. As an example, they can build in the region and then deploy those same applications on an Outpost. Or they could build on an Outpost and then migrate to a local zone or a region. And they're deploying on the same hardware that's operated by our same region-based control plane with our same set of operational tooling. So their developer experience, their application experience is identical on the Outpost to what it is in the region. These Outposts are fully managed and supported by AWS. So no longer do customers have to worry about firmware patching and managing the servers and the hardware and support contracts. We operate everything inside that Outpost rack, just the same way we operate our servers in the region. It's the same shared security model that folks are familiar with for AWS. And with Outposts, of course, customers now can either choose the native AWS variant or the VMware Cloud on Outposts, which will allow VMware to operate that Outpost and allow the vSphere workloads to run on hardware that we will manage for the customer and for VMware. The nice part is customers use the same AWS console to view and manage their resources. It's just another subnet within the availability zone that the Outpost is connected home to. It's the same AWS CLI and SDKs that are familiar from the region. And it allows customers to build and run applications quite literally anywhere they need them with a consistent set of tooling, a truly consistent hybrid experience. There's a rack for those of you who've made it over to the expo. The doors are open. It's loads of fun to go and take a look at that. But going one level deeper, these Outposts can come in a full 42U rack. These are built and manufactured on the same line in the same facility where we build our servers for the region. We send an advanced team out ahead of the rack to take a look at your site to make sure the network connection is sufficient and robust, the connectivity is correct, the power ports are appropriate. We can build these racks in 5, 10, or 15 kVA variants, depending on the amount of power that your facility where you're installing it can support. And then we send AWS trained technicians out to roll this rack into place, quite literally plug it in to power a network, and then they hand it off to our region control plane-based provisioning systems, which provision those servers for you and for your team to use privately within your AWS account and organization. Comes with centralized redundant power within the unit, so we're able to continue operating through any type of temporary issue with one of the power sources. And it also includes redundant active components, switches, spare capacity if necessary. We can work with you to size the outpost to meet your needs and to include additional hardware to allow you to fail over in the event that we need to do work on one of the instances, and we'll take care of all that management for you. It also supports 2 independent network connections, and we recommend that customers do in fact use 2 independent paths to provide network redundancy from a storm, a backhoe that severs a fiber link or anything of the sort. And we're really excited about the new 1U and 2U outpost servers, which Adam in his keynote this morning announced are now generally available, and we're accepting orders for Q1 2022 delivery. The really exciting part about the servers is we've heard from a number of customers over the last 2 years as we've been working with them to deliver outposts and help them build applications on outposts, that they have facilities where a 42U rack is just too large. And they have workloads where they don't need a full 42U rack of capacity, they just need a couple of servers. And maybe this is a smaller branch office, maybe this is a retail shop or a restaurant or something of the sort. Maybe it's a medical facility where they don't need that entire rack. These servers will fit into a standard 19-inch wide cabinet, so we don't need to roll in our own rack as we do with the 42U outpost. The 2U outpost, it uses a 3rd generation Intel Xeon processor. It's a C6i based instance to provide 128 vCPUs, 256 gig of memory, 8 terabytes of local NVMe storage, and it sits in a 36-inch deep rack. The 1U server, for the first time, will bring Graviton-based processors to outposts. This will be a little bit shorter, only 30 inches deep, and provide 64 vCPUs and 128 gig of memory with 4 terabytes of local NVMe storage to allow you to bring our own processors to an even smaller footprint there. Now with servers, just like the racks, you can seamlessly extend your VPC, your virtual private cloud, to your servers anywhere, any on-premise location, much the same as you can with a 42U rack. These servers support SPP ports to connect to your upstream networking devices, which may include other outpost servers. And we support 10 gig ports for your network bandwidth. It also allows you to run some AWS services locally. You'll be able to boot EC2 instances, ECS containers, IoT Greengrass, and SageMaker Neo to start. And we'll continue innovating to look at what else we can do on those outpost servers as more and more customers begin to move their workloads over. Again, just like the racks, same APIs, same tools, same services, same hardware, even broader reach. Now, as we built this hybrid journey, we've actually learned that many customers have an existing technology stack on premises. These workloads are not new, and customers have been building with partners in many cases. And we wanted to meet customers where they are. So with the Amazon Partner Network, it's enabled us to do that at scale. And we're delighted to announce a number of launch partners who've committed to validating their applications on Outpost servers at launch. So if you're working with Pure Storage or Cisco, Mavenir, or CrowdStrike as an example, you'll be able to have confidence that we've been working together with these partners to make sure that your Outpost server experience works very well with either new or existing services from these partners. And of course, we have the Outpost Service Ready program, which has now grown to 72 offerings across 62 partners. We launched that just more than a year ago at reInvent last year. And as a customer, what I love about the Outpost Ready program is it gives you access to validated solution offerings that can just simplify and protect your Outpost deployments. You can monitor your application performance. You can deliver meaningful insights faster than ever before. These partners have undergone what we call a well-architected review with Outpost experts. They've tested their applications in our Outpost test lab. They've completed what we call a technical baseline review with an Outpost specialist solution architect, published documentation and reference architecture that's been reviewed by the AWS team, and most importantly, we can interlock closely to support your workloads on Outposts that are using these partner solutions to make sure that you'll have the best experience. To see a current list of our ISV partners, you can head to the Outpost website, aws.outpost.com/partners, and there's an ever-increasing list of partners with indications of if they're working with the racks and or the servers. Now, in addition to the technology partners, we also have been working with our Amazon Partner Network consulting partners. And many of these partners have deep expertise in helping customers migrate applications to AWS, or in fact, operate their own edge data centers. So more than 40 partners here have these proven relationships and solutions to help customers build and run on-premise workloads. Folks like Booz Allen Hamilton and Worldwide Technologies, among others, that can help with every phase of your migration and are also deeply familiar with the Outpost experience. Now, the most exciting part when you talk about the flexibility Outpost provides is just how broad the reach is. Of course, we'll continue to invest in regions and local zones. Outposts, when we launched, had support to be installed in 35 countries and territories. We've continued to invest in support for new countries, added 8 earlier this year, and I'm excited to share that earlier this week, we announced 5 new countries, including Costa Rica, Ecuador, Morocco, Nigeria, and Vietnam. In total, we now support 65 countries and territories, many of which do not have an AWS region or local zone today. And we're continuing to add more countries and territories over time, as with everything else based on customer demand. So we'd love to hear from you if there's somewhere you'd like to deploy Outposts that is not on this map today. Either in the Q&A session, reach out to your account manager, or head on over to the Outpost website and send us a note with your needs. Now on the Outpost itself, I want to talk a little more about the features and services that can come to this Outpost and run locally wherever you need it. We recently, or earlier this year, announced support for VMware Cloud on AWS Outposts. I should say general availability. This is now generally available for order either through AWS or VMware. We also announced support earlier this year for local EBS snapshots, which are actually backed up to S3 locally on the Outpost. Those EBS snapshots enable us to also support Cloud Endure, both their migration and their DR capabilities on the Outpost or to and from the Outpost. Now, these round out a total of 10 AWS services that can run entirely locally on the Outpost, of course, connected to the region-based control plane. That includes EC2, EBS, ECS, our Elastic Container Service, EKS, our Elastic Kubernetes Service, our Application Load Balancer, or ALB, EMR for customers who need some analytics support, Amazon S3, and Amazon RDS for MySQL, Postgres, and new this year, Microsoft SQL Server. And we'll continue to invest in bringing the services that customers need most to Outposts. Now, I should add that in addition to those services that can run locally on Outposts, Outposts can run in concert with services from the home region for the data that is able to go back. And there are, of course, the same APIs and tools available that will work from the region. As an example, your API calls will be logged to CloudTrail. Existing CloudFormation templates will also work. Tools such as CloudFormation, CloudWatch, Code Build, Code Deploy are all available, and you can use them to deploy and manage applications on your Outpost, as well as in the regions and local zones. So we've worked really hard to make it the same experience with all those familiar capabilities that are there in the region, and to bring them to Outposts. And of course, treating this just like we do our services in the region, we continue to rapidly innovate and make sure the newest features are extending to the Outposts. So just some recent examples. Earlier this year, we announced support for EC2 placement groups on Outposts, spread, cluster, and partition placement, support for capacity reservations for EC2 capacity on Outposts. We've expanded our S3 storage tiers. When we first launched, we offered 48 and 96 terabytes. We now offer a smaller 26 terabyte option for those dev test and early workloads, and also larger 240 and 380 terabit options for more dense storage workloads. An exciting S3 launch was direct access to S3 objects on the Outpost from other devices on your local network. Before the direct access to access S3, it required an EC2 instance on the Outpost to access that and then transfer the object data back to your local device. And as well as support for Resource Access Manager for S3. So Resource Access Manager allows you to share Outpost resources across any account within your AWS organization. Really helpful for folks that have multiple account deployments within an org and need to deploy Outposts in their existing facilities. In addition to private connectivity, to allow customers to use Direct Connect to privately connect that Outpost to the home region using private VPC endpoints, letting them minimize their exposure to the public internet and remove the need for special, sometimes complicated firewall configurations. We also recently launched support for strong consistency with local S3 on the Outpost. And the RDS team has delivered support for a single pane of glass with CloudWatch metrics consistent with the region experience and local backups using the EBS and S3 on the Outpost itself. And with that, I always think the most exciting part about these talks is hearing from our customers directly. So I'd like to ask Rich to talk a little bit about what Philips is doing with Outpost.
Thanks, Rob. So a little bit about me. As Rob mentioned earlier, I head up operations and infrastructure R&D for HealthSuite Platforms. We've been working with AWS since we launched about 8 years ago. HealthSuite is a collection of services and products, well over 100, that enable developers to rapidly build solutions for healthcare, all the way from consumer up to clinical, in a secure, reliable manner. Our original focus was on cloud. Very quickly, as Rob alluded to earlier, we started seeing use cases where there was a need for some on-premise component. We always knew those were there, but we never really had worked through the details on how we're going to straddle solutions in the cloud and on-prem. So starting, I think, way back in the original Snowball days, we started pushing. And we're one of the customers on the back that's always saying, yeah, this is great. We'd like a little bit more, please. Which is good, but sometimes we really have to meter our expectations a little bit because we're pushing very, very hard to accelerate movement to the cloud and to integrate sometimes legacy applications. A lot of our solutions today involve delivery of care. And so when we talk about the cloud, any situation where there's even a momentary loss of connectivity can be a problem if you're in the middle of an interventional procedure, if you're doing imaging, if you're trying to actually take parameters off of patient monitors and analyze those real time. You may not be able to afford that interruption. On the other hand, you may have applications that have such a large amount of data that you do want to ship that to the cloud as fast as possible. Outpost lets us straddle that requirement, keep a certain amount of data and compute on-prem, enables survivability and continuance of operations in the hospital sense when there is that momentary interruption, and then recover. And so some of the examples of where this is important is advanced visualization. We need low latency, we need heavy compute, and we need immediate access to that. And we can build that on an Outpost. We also need to look at patient alarms and monitoring. And you think about all the data now that is flowing from a patient in ICU and in general care. You want to be able to interpret those alarms and ship that information where it needs to within the hospital. But you also want to retain that data. And so after the immediate action is done, you want to be able to move that data to the cloud so you can do analysis on it later or build an overall set of patterns from it. And then there's data analytics. And as we alluded earlier, or talked about earlier, some sometimes we don't have all the resources available to be able to move all the data that's there. So bandwidth is a challenge. We tend to think of bandwidth as being this always available thing. It's a very big planet, and there's lots of places that we operate where we have low bandwidth options. So we might be able to get enough to operate the control plane of an outpost, but we may not have enough to actually transfer all that data for processing. What we're able to do with the on-premise component is to do some of the initial processing, reduce the amount of data we ultimately have to move, do some initial analysis, or even just buffer and smooth that transition. Very often the bandwidth that we have available to us because of the locale is shared through multiple applications, not just Philips solutions, but other solutions at the hospital. So we may have times where data piles up for a little bit and then gets moved out during the low activity periods. And then we actually have intermittent connectivity problems. So a surprising number of facilities around the world are connected through satellite. They're connected through cellular. And while cellular is getting better, it is still a best effort solution in most cases. What this allows us to do is to really, again, have those critical operations and deal with those intermittent losses of connectivity. This helps tremendously in those situations. There's also certain use cases where data needs to remain in the country. There are an increasing level of complex data residency rules, and it's not consistent around the globe. In some places it's all PHI, all personal health information needs to stay in country or even in the facility. And Rob talked about that a little bit earlier with a couple of industries. And in other cases, it's just certain elements. And so what we look to do is only in those cases meet the requirements, hold that data that we must hold on premise, and then anything we can do in the cloud, we still lean on that. So our control can still be in the cloud. Our non-personal information can be in the cloud. If we de-identify that data, we can then move it to the cloud, and some of that can be done on the outpost itself. And so why this? It's the same things that Rob was talking about earlier. We've spent the last 8 years deeply integrating with Amazon. We have our own control plane for our solution, which everything we do is automated through the APIs. Everything is automated through the CLIs. So it's very much a lights out operation for most of our orchestration of workloads and the underlying infrastructure. I can now extend that to the premise. And so where before I would have multiple distribution mechanisms and multiple ways to manage what's on site, I can now extend that same control framework that I've developed over the years to leverage it in the cloud with the on-prem piece. And that's a fantastic solution for us. That fully managed component, something Philips has done for 20 years is manage a solution as a service on-premise, and that includes the full hardware stack and all that remote management and all the break fix and all those pieces. For the large form factor outpost, having someone else handle that, the logistics, the repair, the predictive maintenance, simplifies the challenge I have in delivering solutions to the hospital space. So that's fantastic. The same integrated security framework, I think, Rob, you were talking earlier about it's the same network space, but it's also that same security framework for me, which means I get to validate once in one context, and I don't have to revalidate because I'm simply going to deploy it on-prem now. I can actually leverage what I've already done on my solutions that I've built in the cloud over the years. And then that build once, deploy anywhere, as you can imagine, that greatly simplifies it. So this one's back to you.
Back to me. Thank you. Thanks, Rich. It's really exciting to hear about what Philips continues to do. They've been such a terrific partner with us over the years, and I look forward to hearing what Rich can come back and talk about in the coming years. But of course, we've got a fantastic set of customers that are running outposts and kind enough to let us talk a little bit more about what they're doing. So I just want to go through a few here and give you a sense of what outposts are unlocking for our customers. And first with Morningstar, who's using Outposts as a bridge to going all in on AWS. They sat down and worked closely with us and their teams to define this multi-year migration journey with an end goal of being all in on AWS, but recognizing that they have a significant data center footprint and that it will take time, and to look at latency requirements and for real-time investment research and insights, but also to think about in the future and today how to eliminate the overhead associated with managing and monitoring multiple platforms and one set of tools and APIs on-prem and another on the cloud. Outposts lets them bring the same VMs and the same containerized workloads on-prem and support the workloads that are not yet ready to move to the cloud while having a consistent operational experience to the ones that are already running in the cloud. That consistent hybrid experience with the full management and monitoring has been a real accelerator for Morningstar to allow them to run AWS services both in their data centers and in our regions. It lets them think about building once and running wherever they need to run and moving the workloads when the time is right for them and their business and their application owners. And what it's done is it's accelerated their adoption of AWS. It's also improved their business operations and their end user satisfaction as they continue to become more nimble in their journey. Another example is First Abu Dhabi Bank, who've been using Outposts to really transform the user experience in banking, while managing to comply with these ever-changing and ever-increasing data residency requirements. Fab has been looking at how do we build new user experiences in the mobile payment and banking space, and they've taken Outposts to use as a base for building and deploying modern containerized workloads while being able to store and process the data on-prem where they need it. They have multiple Outposts deployed across Abu Dhabi and Dubai, specifically placed to satisfy their business continuity requirements. And they're also using AWS tools in the region, such as Control Tower, to implement governance guardrails, both in the region and on Outposts. Again, like Morningstar, this allowed Fab to accelerate their digital transformation, to bring AWS services underneath their applications, both on-prem and in the cloud. And in doing so, it's increased their developer productivity and their infrastructure team's productivity by allowing them to use that consistency and that cloud pace of innovation to move faster. Riot Games, summer 2020, Riot launched a new game called Valorant. And they looked very carefully at the gamer population, and they came to us just a few months, maybe even less than that, ahead of Valorant's launch and said, we've identified 4 metro areas where we see a significant population of gamers, and the Valorant game is built entirely on AWS. And they said the round-trip latency from this metropolitan area to the closest region and back is beyond what we consider an acceptable threshold for this game. What can we do? Outposts, the perfect solution. We were quickly able to mobilize and land Outposts in 4 cities across 3 countries. And when we put that first Outpost on the ground and handed it off, there were rioters playing a pre-release version of Valorant on the Outpost the next day. The Outposts allowed them to bring the workload that they'd built in the region and very quickly deploy it exactly where they needed to, while making no changes to the application itself. Of course, some network management to route to the right place, and allowed them to rapidly move their workloads and launch their game with an experience that was acceptable and delightful for their customers. FanDuel is another customer who's been able to accelerate their business expansion in a segment that has extraordinarily strict data residency requirements. They want to rapidly expand in more and more US states as they legalize online gaming, while adhering to the state-by-state data residency obligations, while also offering performance and stability for their customers and having a consistent experience for their application owners. In some of these states, they actually need to run the workload in a specific facility that's been approved by the local regulators. FanDuel dug in with us and migrated their betting platforms from OpenStack and VMware to AWS. They pre-staged environments, did some test and development work, and then were quickly able to deploy production-ready instances with Outposts in the states where they needed them, in the facilities where they required. They offloaded all of that day-to-day infrastructure and hardware management to us and allowed their engineers to focus on building applications to delight their customers, while also working with the regulators with our support to understand the data residency requirements and responsibly deliver that gaming experience. Through this process, FanDuel has accelerated their time to market in these new states from what used to be 15 or 16 weeks, so more than a quarter, to less than 20 days. They've also seen a 30 to 40% improvement in their application performance because of the standardized hardware with Outposts instead of an off-the-shelf variant that might not be quite the same from one deployment to another, as well as recognizing some OpEx savings because they're spending less time managing the infrastructure themselves. National Telecom in Thailand is delivering AWS to their customers using Outposts. This was a challenging use case that the team brought to us. They said, look, we want to modernize our applications and make our workloads cloud ready, but they have public sector customers that are concerned about security and the ability to have that data in a private deployment where there is no shared tenancy and it is entirely within their control was important to them. But they wanted to balance satisfying that requirement with using cloud native services to accelerate and modernize the government agency workloads and bring them along on their cloud journey. So we worked with National Telecom to dig in and modernize their applications using Amazon EKS and ECS on Outposts, allowed them to create a centralized management for these hybrid workloads with in fact, an improved security, with the approved security that AWS services provide for them, things like single sign-on, guard duty, config, CloudWatch, and CloudTrail. And as a result, National Telecom can now provide these AWS cloud services to the Thailand government agencies using Outposts, despite the fact that we don't today operate a region in Thailand. And these government agencies and the state enterprises can work with us as their partner to continue this digital transformation journey. And of course, Dish. You heard a bit earlier today in Adam's keynote from the Dish team directly, but we continue to work with Dish to roll out the first cloud-native 5G network, which includes Outpost rack and server infrastructure. This will reinvent 5G connectivity and innovation. Earlier this year, Dish began deploying the first standalone cloud-based open radio access network, or ORAN, right here in Las Vegas. There's a mobile beta already underway, and they'll connect all of their hardware and network management resources to allow them to scale and enjoy all the benefits of the cloud while deploying their network nationwide. We'd love to stay and take any questions from the group here, and always keen to hear about what you need on your Outpost, where you need those Outposts to be, and even beyond the Outpost, how we can better serve you for those hybrid workloads at the edge. Thanks so much.
So, in this case, AWS won't rank, but the space program is provided by customers.
That's correct.
So, how does that reflect on the price of the service?
Sorry, can you repeat that last part?
How does it reflect on the price of the services offered? Is it the same prices advertised on AWS website, or does it constitute a reduction because AWS doesn't have this?
I see. So the price we publish it's the managed service, right? We own and operate the hardware. We deliver it. It is on the customer side. If you think about our shared responsibility model, I often describe it as in return for the flexibility of Outposts allowing you to land this anywhere that is important to you, the customer needs to provide the physical space, any physical security, the power, conditioning, and the network, and that is separate from the cost of the Outpost service itself.
From our perspective, and we've looked at this extensively, if you balance, so there's there's a cost to you for housing the outpost. The space, power, and cooling, it's not something that we can ignore. And certainly that's something that we've all given up as we move to the cloud. What you gain, though, in terms of lower total cost of ownership, in terms of the break fix being on AWS, the coordination. We've looked at what this looks like to manage third parties, to pay staff to do these things. It is lower, but you have to look at what is your total cost today. So, it evens out in the end, but we end up with a much better experience in the solution that we're delivering. And that's our opinion, so.
Rich's point is a good one too. When you think about the economics, it's important to compare like to like. It is not a like to like comparison to compare just the cost of a server to an outpost, because an outpost is so much more than a server. It's a managed service. It includes the storage. It includes the replacement. It includes the installation and all of that. And we believe the economics make good sense when you look at those like to like, but just looking at the price of a server blade compared to an outpost.
What I'm asking is the cost of, say, an EC2 instance running in AWS cloud versus Outpost. Is it the same, or is it cheaper in Outpost because in this case AWS doesn't have the cost of space, power, and cooling?
I see. So they're close. In some cases, the outpost will drift slightly higher than the region. The reason for that is in the region, we, of course, enjoy the efficiency of operating at scale. Whereas on the outpost, it's a dedicated resource. The rack is unique to you. We're delivering that. We're removing it at the end of the term. We're servicing it. And you do need to provide that space, power, and network. Yeah. I saw another hand in the back there. Sorry, I may have had a bit of trouble hearing. We were asking about the 1U server. That's right. So the server, the 1U and the 2U servers, they will support a smaller subset of services than the racks. It is a smaller footprint, but they are still operated by our regional control plane. They connect back. These are meant to be connected devices, right? An extension of our availability zone, and they're fully supported by AWS. So if you need help with the deployment or with your application or with the service itself, AWS support will help you with that, the ECS or the EC2 service on the server itself. I see. Yes. So Outpost, both the racks and the servers, they require our region-based control plane, right? So every AWS region has a control plane for EC2, and the Outpost is an extension of an availability zone, which it is connected home to. So it's those same systems that we run in the region that operate our servers in our availability zones. They also operate, manage, and monitor the Outpost servers in the rack or the individual servers, and that connection is required. Yeah, great question. We do go out and we pre-inspect the facility, right? And we make sure that we really look around the corner on everything to make sure the rack can fit through the elevators and around the turns, and the floor has the correct weight rating. Does it need bracing depending on the seismic zone of the facility? We do work with the facility, the customer or the facility owner, whether you're in a colo or your own facility, to make sure that it is a safe place to leave the rack. And once we do, we of course will stand behind that rack, but expect you to provide a safe, secure place for it to be and to not interfere with the operation of the hardware. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think an important thing to understand, what we've delivered is a full platform. So we provide infrastructure services, and then at a PaaS layer, we have healthcare-specific solutions, so like clinical data repositories and specific services around imaging. Part of what we've done is we've built a full control plane that controls the aspects or orchestrates the aspects that we get from AWS. We have a number of services that we've developed that need to be orchestrated, and we have a couple of, I have to be careful, corner cases of services that we get from outside of AWS. So partners of AWS who may be deployed there, but are called through their own API. And so our framework sends API calls out to both AWS and those other providers to actually stand up an instance, configure it, monitor it, do things like that.
Did that require a lot of support from AWS so they can make this API call external to their organization?
It did not. So we spent probably about 18 months. Started back in 2013, 2014. And we really started building against the CLI and the API. Now, where we did have to engage AWS as we started to grow. And so one of the things that's been fantastic and also challenging for both of us is we've discovered what the boundaries are of different services. And so in some cases, AWS addresses that. In some cases, we've built in our orchestrations mechanisms to deal with limitations. So everything's got a limit somewhere. Most of what we needed, and this is a testimony to what we get from AWS. Most of what we needed was in the documentation, and so we had a team that went heads down. That team has got about 20 years experience building solutions as a service that are remotely managed, but we had to translate all of what we knew into AWS specific terms. Now, where we do engage AWS is when something new is coming out. So now it's today the server family, the smaller form factor family. Guarantee you there will be sessions where we're trying to go deep really fast because we know how we're going to adopt that. But most of the stuff we tend to not bother you. So yeah, you're welcome.
Please. Absolutely. So we support our G4 instance family on Outpost directly. I should add we support our C5, M5, and R5 instances on the Outpost racks, as well as the G4 and the i3 instance family. And then the servers are based on a C6i for the 2U Intel server and a C6G for the 1U Graviton server. So more to come.
Yeah, so one thing I'm going to modify my answer. One thing that I think is different with Outpost, which is good, is you should work with your Outpost team as you first adopt that to really figure out how to configure that rack. And the flexibility that we see in, hey, this is a workload that doesn't need GPU, but it needs storage, versus we have other workloads that are very GPU intensive. And being able to size that rack accordingly and kit it out with the right types of resources, for that it really does, as you're starting to work with Outpost, it really does help to have that conversation with the team to say, hey, look, this is what we're trying to do. These are the types of workloads, and this is our growth. And that's the other thing that really is a new concept going to the on-prem piece. I have the relatively infinite scalability of a region today. With the Outpost, you really do have to plan, because as Rob pointed out, there's a site survey. There's a whole lot of coordination before that thing rolls in the door. And the last thing you want to do is put it in and then 6 months later, yank it out and have to put another one in. So that's where the partnership with your account team and with the Outpost team really comes into play, at least as you're first starting to adopt it. Now for us, we've got a lot of these coming, and now we've got a couple of flavors that we know we can order, and that's easier. But that teamwork up front in sizing those, I think, is critical.
And I should add, we encourage folks to think about the Outpost as a service but you do still need to think about rack positions and the resources. An Outpost can be as small as now a 1U server, a 42U rack that only has a couple of servers in it, or it can scale up as far as a 96 rack deployment. Now that's one logical outpost. That's quite a large data center footprint, and we can customize the compute and storage capacity in that rack to meet your needs. And the one bit I should add is it can grow with time. So you might start, that you don't want to think about it the same as the region where you can just say, hey, I need another instance because we need to physically get the capacity to you. But we've worked with many customers to understand their expectations for growth and to develop a step function-like growth approach to say, here's the outpost I'll start with, and maybe in 9 months or 12 months, I'll need to call you back, and we'll scale that rack up. And then maybe next year, we'll deploy a second rack next to it, and it allows you to understand the growth of your workload and to track it, and also to, in every case where you're able to leave a bit of buffer to manage the unexpectedly rapid growth and allow you to meet those needs. And you can always call us sooner and say, hey, I need to scale up faster, and we can bring that capacity out to you. Sorry, I'm not sure I caught all of that. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So the nice part about Outpost is you can configure that workload in the Outpost as you need it. So there are customers that, for example, use S3 storage on their Outpost as a local cache, right, to have the data they need quickly. And it's ultimately going to make its way back to a data lake in S3 in the region. And maybe they'll use some other tools in the region to manage that. For the data residency workloads, you can configure your Outpost to not transfer the data that needs to stay in the country, in the facility, whatever your requirement is, off the Outpost. You can use monitoring tools and permissions and things to create that secure boundary for your data, and you have local S3 on your Outpost that's durable and resilient, spread across multiple pieces of hardware, so that it is resilient against hardware failures, much like S3 in the region is. Similar story for EBS as well. So you can deploy multiple racks in multiple facilities, and of course configure your data to be replicated across the two, or you can have a single Outpost. It could be a single rack, it could be multiple racks with multiple physical devices in that rack that are handling your storage, right? So we look at resiliency against failures at any point, and these services are built to withstand a failure for us to really quickly say, of course, we have operational tooling that will attempt to resolve it. If our tooling cannot self-heal, an engineer will be engaged to assist. And if we see behavior on that server that appears atypical, we can send out a replacement, make sure that the data is transferred. Your storage, as an example, is secure and durable, and then take that other hardware away.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to really get to understand is that it looks like a physical single unit, but it is multiple independent nodes and proper isolation. And so again, you want to really think about how you've distributed that storage and how you actually initially spec it, and then you can divide it up. So even if it is a physical cabinet, you still have protection against failure of a single element or even multiple elements before it becomes a data loss situation. And then if you're really paranoid, there are other things you can do. You could split it across multiple data centers. You can store data adjacent to it. And there's a lot of different patterns that we've looked at because we have very small sites and we have very large sites and varying SLAs with our customers. And, yeah.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, but that's not as hard as it sounds. So there have been in 8 years across a lot of AWS services that we work with, very, very few breaking changes that were not well announced ahead of, with far enough time for me to develop that. Most of what we see in the API change is additive, not subtractive. And usually the only things that get us are things that affect the entire industry. So deprecation of something like TLS. Again, we should all have enough runway to predict those things, but we don't see those breaking things. What I do see in a lot of cases is some of my customers fail to monitor my own APIs, because we have a 18 to 36 month deprecation commitment to our customers, announcements in runways before we change those things. And then obviously changes at AWS or other providers also affect us. And we see customers that'll call us, 5 minutes before midnight on the night that it's changing saying, oh God, please stop that. And so that's where you really have to educate, I think, your own developers and your own teams to say this is a living ecosystem. You really do need to monitor every piece of that. Sometimes it's AWS, sometimes it's an open source library that you're using. The world is evolving much, much more faster in this space, and we don't always get what we want, which is an unchanging universe. So I don't think you're going to see that problem unless you fail to pay attention over multiple years.
Yeah, great question. So CloudFront does not operate locally on the Outpost. However, CloudFront has their own set of physical locations, and a customer could deploy a workload in a fashion not unlike what they could use CloudFront for on an Outpost in a place where, for example, there is not a CloudFront point of presence close enough. But today, the CloudFront service does not run on the Outpost itself. All right. Thanks, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of the conference. So great to be here with you.
Thank you.